It takes a lot of love, doesn't it? To live here and now, to live in this moment. In Unity, we call God love. We say that God is synonymous with love. That God is actually infinite love in expression, that mighty magnet, that harmonizing faculty, that harmonizing power. One of our board presidents at the last annual meeting, not one of our board presidents, we only have one, Drayton Riley, gave us a charge. He gave us a call for this year. He said, we're here this year to elevate our game. We're here this year to elevate our game. And he asked us all as individuals, what are we to do? How are we to intuit what that means for us in spiritual community, in our own lives, and in our world? Well, I think the Royals were listening, for one. My brother would be proud of me that I even know that. And I wore my blue. But that's a charge, a call for each one of us, is it not? And we've been diving into this 6-week series using Brené Brown's book, Daring Greatly. Anyone a fan of this book yet? So we've been using her book to dive into Daring Greatly, elevating our game. We spoke about vulnerability. We're on the 3rd week. The first week we spoke about vulnerability. The second week we spoke about shame. And this week, we're speaking about some of the dark matter, some of the dark spots in our consciousness and our minds and our experience. And we're talking about the vulnerability armor, the things that we put up to shield ourselves, to numb ourselves, what we have learned as devices to cope with that energy of life, that energy of the human experience that feels like it just won't stop. So that part of us that has kind of shut off trying. Has anyone else entered into a state where they've realized, ooh, there's part of me that just kind of went to sleep and stopped trying? I gave up on something. I gave up on someone. Maybe I gave up on a part of myself. But as part of the human condition, I think we all come to this place where we realize we've disconnected. And maybe it's a dance that we do a lot. Maybe it's a dance that we come in and out of, that we fall asleep, we wake up. She says this about the Vulnerability Armory. She says, as children, we found ways to protect ourselves from vulnerability, from being hurt, diminished, and disappointed. We put on armor. We used our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as weapons. And we learned how to make ourselves scarce, even to disappear. Now, as adults, we realize that to live with courage, purpose, and connection, to be the person whom we long to be, we must again be vulnerable. We must take off the armor, put down the weapons, show up, and let ourselves be seen. Are you uncomfortable yet? She gives us some processes to go on this adventure. And in a nutshell, the processes this week are to identify what our vulnerability shields are, how we numb ourselves. And to develop mindfulness then around them is the second step, to become mindful of these and engage a life of mindfulness around them. And then the third step is really to apply awareness. So how can we use some tools? How can we watch ourselves when we're starting to use our intelligence to navigate away from vulnerability? How, with mindfulness, can we instead be aware and invite our full being into vulnerability, but not from a place of really being ready for being attacked, but from a place of our spiritual center, from that place within that cannot be shifted, cannot be attacked, cannot be changed. So developing some vulnerability resistance. So this week, if you read chapter 4 on vulnerability, if you didn't, I invite you to dive into it. It's one that we could, probably read 100 times, right? Again, it was one that in thinking about it, how could you get that into a nutshell? Well, there's no nutshell about it. It's one that we have to dive in ourselves and take a look. But I do think that there was something for everyone. There was this lovely smorgasbord, wasn't there, of funky little habits, funky little ways that we fall asleep or we shield ourselves. So I think that no one probably felt left out this week if you read the book. Did anyone feel left out? I think it's a nice little buffet that we can all pick from. And so we're not going to go into everything in detail, but if you're ready to dive into yours, grab the book, grab the chapter, talk to someone who's doing it if you're not reading it yourself, and you can pick your poison. She talks about the vulnerability arsenal, and she says 3 main things, and I'm calling them the trinity of shielding. She says foreboding joy, perfectionism, and numbing. Foreboding joy, perfectionism, and numbing. And just to give a little bit, the foreboding joy really goes into that idea of, am I rehearsing problems? Am I rehearsing trauma? Do I have any catastrophic thinking going on? In the moment something's going well, am I thinking, ooh, it's not really safe to be in this space of joy of things going well because something's always lurking around the corner? Or that place where we think, I've got to keep myself distant so that nothing bad ever happens, knowing that the train of life is always going to be coming and that there's always going to be something around a corner, but maybe if I can protect myself enough, shield myself enough, do this, do that, you fill in the blank, maybe if I can do it enough, life won't affect me. Maybe if I practice enough, maybe if I meditate enough, maybe if I come to the sanctuary enough, maybe somehow then as a human being, I will not be subject to the human experience. Anyone ever had that thought? In Unity, we know that our spiritual practice is not to help us avoid life. It's to give us a different perspective and a different perception and to use our God-given abilities, use our divine birthright to co-create our experience consciously. To look at the unconscious parts of ourselves and to flip that around and say, I am in activation with my creation. I am an actor in my expression, in my world. It's not just happening to me, it's actually also happening through me and happening as me. So here are some of the selections on the buffet. Numbing, anxiety, addiction, shielding, rehearsing tragedy, perpetual disappointment, crazy busy, which she says is one of the most universal treats on the platter. Disconnection, anxiety, any takers? She talks about us having feelings from time to time of being isolated, disengaged, empty, depressed, inadequate, less than, undeserving. She talks about what feelings uncertainty creates, how our demands for time are being pulled, social discomfort, fitting in, finding connection, or not finding it. Certainly, we can all identify those things in our own lives, some of them, right? Now, does anyone feel left out? So one of my favorite parts of the reading this week was when she talked about when we identify these things, because that's the first step to identify, the idea of kind of, going, what's your sign? What's your sign? As far as these strategies. And she gave the example of anxiety with disconnection rising. So what's your sign? Well, my sign is rehearsing tragedy with perpetual disappointment rising. So we can all identify something with that. We can identify our signs. And I'm not going to read this horoscope for you aloud. You all have to read your own horoscope, right, in the book. You have to figure it out. But if we are ready to do the work, and we can identify our signs, it's kind of the same as, has anyone ever read, a book that says Virgo's this or Aquarian's this, and you've read one of the little writings, right, on you, and it's really resonated, and all of a sudden, even with your stuff, you just love yourself more. You're like, oh, well, I'm a Virgo, so I'm meant to really look at every detail. And, some people could call that this or call that that, but that's just me. And all of a sudden, what happens? Where there is awareness, there is non-resistance. We develop an acceptance. We develop a resilience. And we may even be at risk of falling in love with ourselves. We may even be at risk of falling in love with those things that we call our dark parts or our dark sides that, this is my stuff. Hi, nice to meet you. This is my sign, and here's my stuff. We may actually start kind of liking that bag going, this is what it is, but now that I'm aware of it, now that I know what's in it, I can see how even those things have been intelligence, universal intelligence, making me strong, making me aware, giving me what I needed to show up. And then the use of them becomes optional. Does that sound like freedom? The use of them, once we have awareness, becomes optional. as far as why wouldn't we just let lying dogs sleep? Why would we go into this inquiry? Why would we even ask the question, shh, I don't need to know about that. I don't need to know about myself. All I need to do is celebrate my good stuff. I don't need to have awareness of my other stuff. Anyone have family? Anyone have close friends? Anyone have partners? Anyone have a place of employment? You know what happens when we start to look at our stuff and we don't just let lying dogs lie? There's a hallelujah chorus all around you going, amen, right? When we see someone doing their deep spiritual work, I am telling you, how does it feel, right? It feels amazing, doesn't it? And I think something really, really spectacular happens when people aren't doing their spiritual work, right? And if you've been in Unity long enough, you see a lot of people doing your spiritual work, and you have a lot of these great things like, I need to have a clearing conversation with you. Here's some of my stuff. Here's some of my thoughts and my feelings. But when we clear our stuff and when we're aware, there is so much more permission for us to be exactly who we are and how we are. Just as we are. Not even worrying about healing it, fixing it, changing it. When there is awareness, when there is accountability, when there is mindfulness, there is so much space to be. Because you know what happens? It doesn't become personal anymore, right? We release the whole thing where something's personal, it's about me, and we just begin to, as receivers and givers with each other, we just begin to bless. We really do. But what happens when we don't have awareness of our stuff? Then you get the criticism choir. You need to look at this. You really need to look at this. Like, this is so bad, you need to look at this, right? And mirrors everywhere, shining, pressing, sometimes cutting glass. There's this field of going like, do you know you have this going on? And I think sometimes even within ourselves, we have that within ourselves, a part of ourselves that goes, ooh, do you know you have this going on? So why? Why dive into this inquiry? She gives some good reasons of her own. She says that when I looked at my data, the primary question was, what are we numbing and why? And this helps us understand one of the practical reasons of why even look at this stuff. She says, Americans today are more debt-ridden, obese, medicated, and addicted than we have ever been. For the first time in history, the CDC announced that automobile accidents are now the second leading cause of accidental death in the United States. The leading cause, drug overdoses. In fact, more people die from prescription drug overdoses than from heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine drug use combined. She goes on to say that we're desperate to feel less or more of something, to make something go away, or to have more of something else. She says anxiety and disconnection also emerged as drivers of numbness in addition to shame. The anxiety described, she says, by the research participants appeared to be fueled by uncertainty, overwhelming and competing demands for our time. And one of the big surprises, social discomfort. Good reason to dive into the inquiry, right? Good reason. Because we're here to come alive, are we not? We are here to come alive. We may get numb to that truth. We may stop looking at it from time to time. But anyone that has been awake one moment and had someone they loved pass the next moment gets a rude awakening, or a beautiful one, on how we are not here to accumulate things, how we are not here to injure each other, but we are here to come alive. The death process, as far as we know today, isn't optional for our human self, for this physical body. It is coming at some point. At some unknown time, in some unknown way, we will not be here as a physical being, as a physical body. When we get in touch with that reality, rather than numb ourselves from it, not obsess about it in fear as if it's right around the corner anytime, and then we have to just go over into joy. I have to have joy, I have to have good things, everything has to make me feel good. But when we become aware and we develop mindfulness around it, we begin to live our lives differently, do we not? Our priorities change. Our energy changes. We are here to come alive, and that is clear. And the beauty of it is that we live in an intelligent universe, and it is full of divine appointments that are perfectly patterned to support our coming alive, to support the next stage of our growth into unity consciousness, into love. She says that we cannot selectively numb the dark. When we numb the dark, we numb the light. So that's a good reason why to dive into these studies. When we numb the dark, we numb the light. So, if that's not convincing enough, there's some other places and some other people who have talked about light. In Scripture, and the great master teacher says, you are the light of the world, right? We are here to let our light shine, to glorify our source, our creator, our creative faculties. Let your light shine, let your light so shine before men, maybe also women and children and the earth. Just kidding. But we're told not to put it under a bushel basket, but to put it on a lampstand and shine. So will we remember in each moment that we can't selectively numb the dark and numb the light? The only way, she says, to get rid of darkness or to illuminate is to add more light. To add more light. So let's look into identifying places of awareness and tools that we can do. Because when we identify, we can take action, and then we can also affirm. And when we affirm, we create a new mind. We create resilience of the mind. So I'd like to invite up a couple of helpers to share with us parts from the book. There is a study that she did. She looked at research participants and anxiety. I picked anxiety out of all the good meals on the buffet. I picked anxiety because I thought it has some good nuggets for a lot of us. She looked at Group A and Group B. And here are the examples. Group A found ways to manage and soothe the anxiety, to manage and soothe themselves. Group B found that changing behaviors was the way to approach anxiety. And mention which group you are.
I'm Group A. I make a pot of coffee after I tuck in my kids so I can take care of all the emails between 10 p.m. and midnight. If there are too many, I wake up at 4 a.m. and start over again. I don't like getting to work with unanswered email in my inbox. I'm exhausted, but they're answered.
I'm Group B. I've simply stopped sending unnecessary emails and asked my friends and colleagues to do the same. I've also started setting the expectations that it might take me a few days to respond. If it's important, call me. Don't text or email, call. Better yet, stop by my office.
I use red lights, grocery lines, and elevator rides to stay on top of my calls. I even sleep with my phone in case someone calls or I remember something in the middle of the night. One time, I called my assistant at 4 a.m. because I remembered that we needed to add something to a motion that we were preparing. I was surprised that she answered, but she reminded me that I told her to keep her phone on the nightstand. I'll rest and let off steam when we're done. Work hard, play hard, that's my motto. And it doesn't take much to play hard when you haven't slept in a while.
My boss, my friends, and my family know that I don't take calls before 9 a.m. or after 9 p.m. If the phone rings after or before those times, it's either a wrong number or an emergency, a real emergency, not a work issue.
So let's take time today and this week to ask ourselves, are we looking for help to deal with what is? Or are we looking for change? Is there room in my life to do it differently? What and who am I waiting for to give me permission to do life differently? Who gives that permission? There are a lot of people, aren't there, today making lifestyle changes? Big lifestyle changes, setting boundaries for themselves. Have you heard of the tiny house movement? There are people getting off the grid. There are people paying off their mortgages, stopping credit card use. There are people simplifying. There are people moving to intentional communities. There are people moving internationally to create a culture shift, a place where they are more in line with the values and siestas and this culture. There's communal living. There's canceling your TV for Netflix and Hulu for getting a lot less. Am I going to get sued like Oprah? For the meat industry thing, canceling your TV and getting Hulu and Netflix for a fraction of the price. There are ways to manage not ourselves, but the world around us, and to make choices that we forget are in our power to make. There's a go slow movement. If you haven't seen it, it's slowmovement.com. There is room for doing this life differently. This is your life. No one is telling you, no one is telling me, no one is telling us how to live it. Will we dare greatly? Will we be bold and live boldly? It's time, isn't it, to consciously make our choices? Now, she says this about when we begin to live consciously, when we begin to live vulnerably, when we begin to live this life, she gives us a warning. And here's the warning. She says this: if you decide to walk into the arena and dare greatly, you're going to get kicked around. It doesn't matter what your arena is. She goes on to say, you're going to be on the receiving end of some cynicism and criticism before it's over. Why? Because cynicism, criticism, and cruelty and cool are even better armor. They can be fashioned into weapons that not only keep vulnerability at a distance, but also can inflict injury on the people who are being vulnerable and making us uncomfortable. So even in the face of that, are we willing, when criticisms comes up, when we live this life of vulnerability and we feel like we are engaging in this field where we're not safe, are we willing to stand up and shake it off? Are we willing to engage anyway? Would you stand up with me and shake it off? Stand up with me and shake it off. So when we find ourselves in fear of being vulnerable, when being vulnerable feels uncomfortable, you get a little exercise today. We're incorporating everything. It's a full body spiritual experience today, just in case, we need it. But are you willing to stand up and shake it off? Everyone together, let's say standing up and shaking it off. Standing up and shaking it off.